Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 to talk about the one thing that this game has done significantly better than its predecessors and actually every game that's come out since then, because we have had Total War Pharaoh. And that is the discussion about difficulty. See, Warhammer 3, the way it handles campaign and battle difficulty is actually the best in the entire series, and I am not exaggerating on this particular point. The way difficulty has been handled in the past in Total War games hasn't exactly been a stellar experience. Some people would say that Warhammer 3 is significantly easier than previous games, and it is, but the way it is easier, quote-unquote, the way difficulty is handled in this particular game in general is far better. Because you no longer have the nonsense as you did in previous games where the AI cheated to such an extreme level that through a faction that only controlled one single piece of territory on the map, let alone an entire province, was creating armies constantly to throw against you. And they would suicide those armies against you. So I just want to look at how difficulty has been handled in the series before and how Warhammer 3 decided to handle it. And this particular feature from my perspective is what makes Warhammer 3 the best game in the franchise. Because handling of difficulty is such an important aspect of making a good campaign experience. If difficulty is imbalanced, if difficulty is ridiculous, then it doesn't push the player towards playing in a good fashion. It pushes towards what people would call cheese hammer. And certainly that did exist and still does exist. We still use play of cheese to win campaigns in a game. But it's not the mandatory experience as it was in previous games, because that's a very significant aspect. Cheese in Warhammer 3 in a lot of ways is actually a fairly optional experience. Would I win this battle? Yes, I would. Maybe not with this few casualties, but I would. So what happens with respect to cheese is that you can use it, but you don't have to use it in Warhammer 3, at least in Immortal Empires, to actually win a campaign. You can make, shockingly enough, plenty of mistakes in a campaign in Warhammer 3 and still win. That is fair enough. Now, certainly, this does create the kind of situation where a campaign will be over within 30 turns. Though, to be fair, it's not like campaigns in previous games were not over within the first 30 turns. They were, actually. That's kind of the point I want to draw attention to. So, in Rome 1 and Medieval 2, the way campaign difficulty worked, or the way difficulty in general was handled by Creative Assembly, is the AI got some cheats. The AI was also really stupid. So, it really needed any kind of cheat benefit in order to have any kind of potential chance against the player. So, that was, for the most part, I would say fine enough as an experience. Obviously, it did come with its own issues on that level, but like overall I would say the way difficulty was handled in Medieval 2 and Rome 1 was pretty decent. Sure, the AI did get some nonsensical bullshit cheats, but the AI was so easily abusable, like you didn't even have to try to abuse the AI, you would just end up coming out on top compared to it. But then Creative Assembly started taking notice of this, because what ended up happening in Medieval 2, especially towards the end of it before Empire came out, or even after Empire came out, you started seeing a section of the player base playing the game modded, unmodded, doesn't matter, where they were taking advantage of the AI weakness in such a way that they could win entire battles with minimal casualties. This especially happened with things like Third Age Total War. The response from the modding community was the garrison script. Yeah, the basis of the garrisons that we all know and hate in Total War came from mods back in the day, because it was the only way modders could create a quote-unquote sense of challenge in a campaign to give a player any kind of foe that they would have to deal with. Of course, it wasn't exactly a great way of handling difficulty, absolutely not, even back then. But it did achieve its role of forcing the player to deal with more bullshit. Of course, the response from the player base there And I really think like Creative Assembly was inspired by modders in this respect. But the response from the players, like, how do you deal with something like, how do you deal with an AI when you know that the AI is just going to cheat and use a garrison script the moment you attack them? Well, you just play in a cheesier and cheesier fashion. But then Napoleon and Empire come out, and the AI start getting more and more benefits, so you cheese even further. And the AI is also so stupid in Empire and in Napoleon that you can annihilate entire armies, even if you're not actually actively trying for that. You can annihilate entire factions and armies, even if you're not really pushing for the cheese. Like, if you play Napoleon, you can take out London in like 10 turns, and that's the British Empire, and you've won the campaign. It is a bit tricky, right? Because you have to send an army from France, you have to recruit that army, send it. I prefer going for Ireland or there. But obviously that was not great. The response from Creative Assembly, like, AI improvements would eventually come and would eventually happen, but the response from Creative Assembly with respect to all of this was to push down even further on AI benefits in a campaign. So you ended up with more significant benefits to the AI in their particular campaigns. And what happened in the aftermath of that? Shogun 2 came out, and Shogun 2's legendary difficulty was ridiculous bullshit. I'll be honest. Like, there's no way for me to say anything nice about Shogun 2's handling of legendary, because I like Shogun 2. There's a lot of things I do like about that game, but the way legendary was handled... So understand, the AI getting benefits in combat had been a thing in every Total War game, because the AI was pretty stupid. Well, Shogun 2's AI was not necessarily quite as stupid. It still had plenty of things you could abuse, absolutely. But it still had a lot of those combat benefits. It was kind of funny, like, melee was really the meta for the player, because, like, range-wise, if you play with a ranged army in Shogun 2, you might, at least in vanilla Shogun 2, not talking about Fall of the Samurai, you might have a lot of issues. But regardless, corner camping, cheesing, ambushing was the norm. And you might say, oh, some of those are legitimate tactics. Yes, some of them are. But then there's also plenty of things that aren't legitimate tactics, that are just nonsense that we're taking advantage of. And why did I recruit a bunch of peasants? I don't know. I screwed up focusing on the conversations. Regardless, that's a mistake on my part. But you ended up in this kind of campaign situation in Total War, where, like, not only did the AI have significant benefits in battles in Shogun 2, but the AI also ended up having fairly significant benefits on the campaign. Like, virtually every faction, major, minor faction in Shogun 2 on Legendary, could create an entire army out of thin air. Like, they didn't have the resources from a single province. Like, you're talking here about single province factions or single settlement factions that would create an entire stack. If not more, like a stack and a half. I think that was, like, the norm of, like, Shogun 2. And you had an AI that had significant benefits in every individual battle, but on top of that had such insane campaign benefits and was very hyper-aggressive against the player. Now, this quote-unquote added a sense of challenge. I'd say it added a sense of bullshit. And then you have... Realm Divide, pushing things even further on that level. So winning a campaign about Shogun 2 on Legendary was less about, like, playing in a very interesting tactical and strategic ways. It was more about abusing everything you could. Because, like, your campaign could be over on the first battle. Like, that's how ridiculous things were in a campaign in that game. Things were so absurdly broken in that particular title that it really became the norm for a very substantial portion of the player base to cheese everything that could be cheesed during the course of a campaign. And that's how you get to things like Cheese Hammer, as some people would call it, or Cheese Wars, really, if you want to go down that path. That's what Shogun 2 did. But Shogun 2 was not the worst part about it. A campaign could still be won, even if you had to use a bunch of cheese. But you see a problem being created in Shogun 2. And actually, this had been a problem in every Total War game since the launch, but it really accelerated this process. if you know the AI is getting benefits from the very beginning of their campaign, and if you don't deal with them very early on, guess what? You're going to be pushed as a player into hyper-aggressive campaign behavior from the very beginning of the campaign. And that's precisely what happened in Total War. It's like the way to win a campaign was to win like the first 20 turns, get yourself into a dominant position within the first 20 turns of a campaign, and winning the campaign after that was just just ended up happening if you could win those first turns of a particular campaign. If you could overcome the first 20 turns, great, you would end up winning the campaign. If you couldn't overcome the first 20 turns of a campaign and end up in a decent enough position, you would end up flat losing the campaign, and you would likely lose it within those first 20 turns. That was the problem of how difficulty was handled in Shogun 2. But difficulty in Shogun 2 was not going to be the be-all and end-all. It got far worse with Rome 2 and Attila. This is the reason I hate both of those games, because both of those games defined difficulty for many years to come until the release of Warhammer 3. So in Rome 2 and Attila, difficulty took a turn from the worst. The AI still retained a lot of cheats, but then now suddenly the player had significant downsides, especially in public order in Attila. So keeping control of the territory you had conquered with difficulty, because the AI would produce a lot of stacks, was difficult. So the developers were clearly trying to slow the players down, but it had the exact opposite effect, believe it or not, in a campaign. If you're getting constant rebellions, well, guess what? That's way to farm experience for your troops and your generals. And that's what ended up happening in campaigns in Rome 2 and Attila. Like, all the things that were supposed to make the game harder had the exact opposite effect in a campaign, where I wouldn't say it necessarily made it easier, but it certainly pushed you in the perspective of like, oh, you want to win a campaign? Enjoy cheesing the shit out of it, basically. That was the campaign experience of Rome 2 and Attila. That's how you won campaigns on Legendary. And it actually got far worse in Attila on this perspective than it had been previously. So the experience degraded further and further and further the more quote-unquote difficult they made it. But that was not the end of it. Oh no, that was far from the end of it, actually. Because then Warhammer 1 comes out, and you again see like ridiculous AI behavior, hyper-aggressiveness, public order modifier. Like, you see this public order modifier, this you can thank Attila for this crap, this -8 public. Oh, this is how you make a campaign difficult. It's not. Like, these rebellions, like, if I look back, and this is the reason I would never replay a campaign in Warhammer 1 or in Warhammer 1 or 2 in a vanilla setting, like, the best way to play a campaign in those games was to abuse the constant rebellions. Oh, you're gonna get constant rebellions because of a stupid public order modifier in a campaign? Great. We're just going to take advantage of those rebellions. Oh, AI garrisons are really strong, but AI armies or garrisons are really strong in settlements so let's just abuse that to annihilate entire enemy armies. And we know the AI, because this is what the AI would do in Warhammer 1 and 2. The AI would constantly launch attacks against you, and you realize, well, you know, I can just win the battles by ambush stancing them next to garrisons, and the garrisons are going to help me out, and the AI is just going to suicide itself again and again against my settlement. One of the best things you could do in a campaign in both Warhammer 1 and 2 is like farm the constant rebellions, or find a settlement that you could just sack continuously for like 10-20 turns, get a significant amount of lord experience, money, and then win the campaign through that. It was not, and I repeat this, it was not a good campaign experience. Now you could say, oh, you could use self-imposed limitations in a campaign. I really don't buy that argument. Self-imposed limitations, like if you're having to limit yourself as a player to not win a campaign, and you're screwing yourself over deliberately in order to give the AI a fighting chance and not abuse everything that you could just to slow down your campaign progress, that's not great design of the game. So enter Warhammer 3 after all of that. Warhammer 3 toned down the battle benefits significantly, to the point that you can completely disable them right now in Warhammer 3. It was not the best at launch, but right now, like, just consistently disabling these AI stats, while also improving AI behavior. Now, to be fair, Free Kingdoms already did this. Of course, the problem with Free Kingdoms is that while Free Kingdoms certainly improved AI behavior and certainly improved diplomacy, which actually is very significant. So the AI in previous games would just be suicidal against the player. Like, they would produce one army, attack you with that army, suicide, produce another army, attack you with that army. Again and again and again. An entire gameplay loop was based around that kind of decision-making by the AI. They had such cheats in terms of recruitment, upkeep, money, that it could do so. It's ridiculous when you see single Salmon factions in Warhammer 1 and 2 do this against you. It's like, are you just feeding Grimgore in this campaign? Because that's exactly how it felt like. It created a miserable early game and not great middle game and a horrible late game in every single one of those campaigns. And that remains the case to this day. There are things I really, really enjoy about... there are things I certainly do really enjoy about something like Warhammer 1 and 2, like the way battles handle, etc. But in terms of like difficulty scaling, is absolutely ridiculous. Now, to be certain, having gone for that experience in Warhammer 1, 2, and even perhaps to an extent the launch of Warhammer 3, before they improved this difficulty, I certainly have ended up as a player who's, like, you know, taking advantage of everything I can in this campaign, like recruiting a significant number of armies, for instance, to use in the campaign. Just abusing AI behavior in general to get my way. Because you can still abuse this AI behavior to an extent, though. The AI is less suicidal than it was before, and some things are less abusable than before. Though I would personally argue it puts into... It certainly does highlight... It does certainly highlight some of the things.
I greet you with the dragon's authority.
Some of the issues that we've had, like how long it takes you to actually get good units in a campaign. Because, like, what would happen in Warhammer 1 and 2, you'd waste so many dozens and dozens of turns just on frivolous shit as opposed to building an empire. Now, to be sure, there's an argument to be made about, like, how the empire shouldn't become a wasteland within the first 20 turns, but it does so, and it always did so. In the course of a campaign. That was not really a change, if you will, in terms of the campaign experience. But what CA did in Warhammer 3 deliberately, they toned down the melee cheats. The reason they did so is because they had to focus on melee factions, like the demon faction specifically. So they had all the melee factions, and they realized that if they kept the melee cheats, it would be an enormously horrible experience. Like corner camping, grid formation, checkerboard formation for range units, all that came from the melee cheats of Warhammer 2. Toning down AI cheats on the campaign, so the AI is not just constantly recruiting a stack every couple of turns that they're hurling against the player. That's not a great experience. Severely reducing the amount of free experience. The AI still gets some of it, but severely reducing the amount of free experience on units. Now, I do think that what they should do in Warhammer 3, because it's not perfect, like right now, they vastly improved the early game. But it's still a situation in a campaign where the meat of that particular campaign is still going to happen during the course of the early game, so there's still issues with respect to that. Absolutely so. Let's just go with Rook and Felix. There's still issues in the way that campaigns are currently designed in the sense that they're too front heavy, as it is. NCA should improve the situation with respect to that, but at the same time, like, they really made the early game a far less miserable experience and gave you potential. They haven't improved the late game, the mid-late game. So what I would say is that they should possibly tone down the AI cheats in the early game, at least for some of the major factions. Like, there's still some ridiculous crap, like how many armies a faction can produce in a campaign. They should tone some of those down, but make them more aggressive. and like make them more aggressive in the middle late game. So like after, let's say, 10 turns, the AI gets better cheats, and this continues on for like 6 times. Let's put like that. Let's use that as a benchmark. Like let's say you're playing a campaign in the course of Warhammer 3, and it's like the AI just gets better and better cheats. Because like the problem of the cheats that we had in Warhammer 1 and 2 was not the idea that the AI was the problem was in the mid or late game, because like if you overcame the early game, you would basically win the campaign. No, the problem was the early game. So it is greatly appreciated. Now, as I said, I would still reduce things even further in terms of the early game, because yeah, sure, look, someone like myself, we can conquer a lot of territory. The campaign should not be designed around the playstyle, around the way someone like myself plays. It should be designed like, ask yourself, like, how is someone that's jumping into Total War going to play this? And it's like right now, the way a Total War campaign it plays out is very, very front heavy, which is not a great experience, because it means like, if you don't succeed within the first 20 turns of a campaign, you're going to end up so far behind, it's not even going to be funny in that particular campaign experience. So that is absolutely something that I will look to change right now in terms of how campaigns are handled in Total War. Like that balance between the early game, mid game, because like the way you could make the mid game more interesting, and this was like the mid game not being interesting was certainly a problem even back in the day. The way I would say that the mid game can become more interesting is if potentially the AI gets more benefits there, but like the early game benefits are not quite the insanity that they currently that even as they currently are, though. Keep in mind, the benefits that the AI has right now are nothing but a pale shadow compared to what they used to have before. But CA really moved down the right path. My point is, they really moved down the right path compared to every other game that they've ever released with difficulty in Warhammer 3. This is what's frustrating about Pharaoh. This is one of the chief reasons why I really like... why I really dislike Total War Pharaoh is like Total War Pharaoh was such a massive step down. By the way, it's also in a lot of ways reduced the size of garrisons and settlements compared to how they had been in every other game. But then you look at Total War Pharaoh, you look at Troy, you look at really horribly designed campaigns from the very beginning where, and this is the problem of the system we had before Warhammer 3 that continues in Pharaoh, you have a really brutal early game, but if you overcome that brutality, you're just steamrolling the campaign. That's what would happen in Warhammer 1 and 2. Like, the early game would be a nightmare, but once you overcame that, you would just annihilate everything and everyone in your path. That would happen. That would certainly happen during the course of a campaign. Whereas... like right now, that you can actually have some situations. There are certain campaigns which actually don't adhere by this rule. So I'll give you a perfect situation, because it does happen more often than you might think. Let's say you're playing a campaign as the Chaos Dwarves. Yes, I'm gonna use Draziv's example, right? I forgot to enable Toggle Fog of War over here to demonstrate that. But let's say you're playing a campaign as Draziv, right? Well, beyond the early game issues of Imric and Tretch and all that, you're also going to have one particular problem that's going to define how you handle the rest of your campaign. And that decision is, you've got Grimgor to your west in a campaign like that, and you've got you've got Grimgor to your east, you've got the dwarves to your west. What do you go after? Because like you ignore Grimgor, that's going to be a pain in the neck. You ignore the dwarves, they might show up with 4 full stacks at their territory while you're still dealing with Grimgor. And if you move against Grimgor, you're probably going to encounter a Kebie, who is not going to like you because you're chaos. So it creates a real dilemma. That's, like, this is the reason I consider, like, Draziv's campaign one of the best in the game, because it's not just a free ride. Sure, you get those caravans, you can use those, but Kebie is close enough that they can actually attack you. So you really have to worry about, you really have to deal with the dilemma over there, and you're not just getting a free ride. That is how difficulty should be handled. Dilemmas, decisions, having to use the resources. There are also more resources as well compared to the baseline. Like, the reason I like Dark Elf campaigns so much, or Greenskin campaigns, like, what defines those campaigns is, like, a lot of people dislike you, to be sure, especially in a Greenskin campaign or a Skaven campaign, but you have the resources to deal with the campaign situation. You gotta choose your battles, though. You will not just get everything for free. You won't have enough resources to deal with everything, so you actually have to plan around it, as opposed to what would happen in Warhammer 1, 2, Rome 2, Attila, Shogun 2, where it's like a minor faction could stop you dead in your tracks for like 5 turns, and you had to base your entire campaign plan on like just cheesing the crap out of it to win. That was not a good campaign experience. That was not a good design of difficulty, from my point of view. So, like, overall, CA did a much better job in this particular game than they had done previously. And I do believe that they should continue going down this path, as opposed to something like what SFO does with its massive fucking garrisons, which is not a great experience. Or what Total Pharaoh does, because the way Pharaoh handles difficulty is not exactly great either. This is a better way of handling difficulty than every other Total War game in the series. I'm not exaggerating it right here in any way, shape, or form. Oh, sure, there are drawbacks, absolutely, but like, it is the one feature, along with the much improved diplomacy system, that makes campaigns have more sense. Like, that was another problem that we had in previous games, is like, because the AI hated you so much, dealing with AI from a diplomatic standpoint was just like, yeah, we might make a deal, but I have no reason to believe that you will honor said deal. That was kind of a major problem in terms of like dealing with AI, because it made it so, like, it wasn't like a question of unpredictability. No, you could predict AI would screw you over. That was very predictable in a campaign in Total War. You could expect AI to do shit like that. But that was about... And you could expect AI to constantly harass the crap out of you as a player. So not great. Over there, when, like, the AI just doesn't exist to build an empire, the AI exists to harass the shit out of the player. That was really the fundamental problem, really, when we're thinking about how these kind of things were handled in previous Total War games. So, massive positive move in the right direction for Warhammer 3. Step back in Pharaoh, because, like, actually Pharaoh, shockingly enough, Pharaoh was actually a massive step back compared to how things had been handled in Warhammer 3, or how things have been handled in Warhammer 3 so far. Because, like, it's got massive garrisons, it's got that excruciating early game situation, and then once you get past that early game, you just end up, as I said, steamrolling your campaign. You just end up steamrolling your campaign situation, which is not especially great to deal with. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Questine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.